Welcome to TMBS 153, the Lyft Uber capital strikes, and Michael's final thoughts on cancel culture, featuring Anna Kasparian. With me is David Griscom and Alicia Brooks. Hi, Alicia.
Hello.
Hi, David.
How's it going?
Later on in the program, we're going to get to Nancy Pelosi. Turns out not to have been a good negotiator during this whole coronavirus issue with the CARES Act. Surprise. We'll play some tape there. And we also have, as you know, the headline says, the Lyft Uber capital strikes, and a conversation with Alicia and Anna on cancel culture. And we'll have a discussion about that as well, I'm sure. But before we get to that, David, you want to do what we're now calling the David monologue.
The monologue, the late night host monologue.
Yeah. This week I wanted to focus on something which we've already known is coming, but has been really revealed in a material way, which is a little preview of what a future of working with the Biden administration is going to look like. During last week's convention, a commitment to call for an end to fossil fuel subsidies and tax breaks for the fossil fuel industry was pulled from the final party platform, even after the platform had been approved by vote. And this was a kind of, sneaky move by the DNC to pull this language out of the official party program. Now, this is interesting. I don't think it's as materially important, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's an interesting lesson for us going forward to realize where we need to be fighting our battles with this kind of party and this organization. So first of all, this was something that both Biden and Kamala ran on during their campaigns. So the fact that the DNC had to sneakily, after it had already been voted into the party platform, the fact that they had to come through like a sneaky strategy, which is what they did. Essentially, they said that it was put in there in error, which is not true. People voted for that specific proposal. The fact that the DNC had to come in there and pull that language out of the platform is a great example of what we're going to be getting with the Biden administration, right? Which is, speaking certain language to the left when they think that will be beneficial for them. And then when in power, when they have the opportunity to pursue those activities, slowly walking away from them after the debate has already happened on the left. Mm-hmm. And this is important because and there's no guarantee either that Biden is going to beat Donald Trump. It's not looking as certain as it even felt like it was a couple months ago. But it's really important that us as the left, the socialist left, the people who actually want to address these systematic problems like climate change, not get overly fixated on the symbolic. Look, the party platform doesn't have teeth. We have won victories in the party platform in the past. And in the long run, they're kind of minuscule victories because the people in power are going to do what they had intended to do in the first place. And for the Biden administration, that is pushing back Donald Trump and then reinstating a kind of class society and business as usual for an unequal neoliberal system. Look, the failure of the Democratic Party to get their head around any kind of coherent political issue is absolutely dangerous to the future of the planet. And we need to be addressing them directly and calling them out for their hypocrisy. Look, the liberal slogan on climate change, "We believe science," is a perfect example of how weak politics of symbolism can be. Like, what does it do? It addresses the problem and then it gives no material support to it. That's the weakest kind of left political program you can ever imagine. That's the kind of politics that the Democratic Party has fixated on and created over the past few decades, which is signaling to an issue, doing nothing about it. And it's important that we not fall for their game going forward. I'm not saying that we don't pay attention to what they're doing and these kind of little things. They are interesting and they're important. But don't think that getting Joe Biden to change his wording on a statement is the same thing as getting material power, because they're going to do what they want. And what they really want to do is they want to wrap up and nullify the activity and the energy that's going on in the left wing of the party and the left wing of this country right now, and to silence those people while they continue to give favors to the right wing. The real question that we have today is dealing with the reality of the fact that despite the fact that the United States is currently on fire, we have massive, tropical storms merging in the Gulf Coast. that we are dealing with this massive COVID crisis, that capitalism is in complete shambles right now, that the political movement that is resurgent, that is coming into power, is a return to the default neoliberalist politics of the past. So what have we learned from the last decade of left populism? It's that rhetoric alone is not going to build the institutions that are necessary to deliver the kind of political power and the shifts that we need to see. I always point to this. What Ronan Burtenshaw said when he was on our show a couple months ago is absolutely the fundamental mission of the left. It says we need to convince people that politics can change their lives. We need to convince people that organizing collectively, having a class perspective, is not only the right analytical perspective, but one that is actually going to be beneficial for them in the long run, one that is actually going to shift and change politics in a material way. We can't get obsessed with symbolism. That doesn't mean that we fall into despair. Look, it's exciting and wonderful that so many people in this country are prepared to stand up for Medicare for all and are prepared to fight for climate justice. But we're learning the hard lesson that just getting politicians to signal to these things is nowhere close to action on these things. We don't have the luxury that the Democrats or the Republicans do when it comes to politics. We're not going to just get money sitting on our asses. And we're not going to be able to deliver the change that we need without building organizations, community organizations, political organizations that are able to not only make demands, but actually to deliver directly to people what is needed. Look, there's an exciting proliferation of important groups. The Black Lives Matter protests have been incredible. We've talked about this plenty of times on the show. The mutual aid movement in this country is an absolutely beautiful reality. The fact that people are rising up against a kind of neoliberal perspective that says the market is going to come up for solutions and rejecting that and actually coming together as communities to make sure that the people in society who are threatened by capitalism and threatened by the COVID crisis are taken care of. There's a lot that's happening right now that is really encouraging for the left. And what we need to do is to build on those, specifically the ones that are person-to-person political organizations, and not fixate so much on changing wording and rhetoric of politicians, because they know how to play that game. Every political movement in this country that's been successful and that's come from the left has not come from, electing a certain politician. It's come from on the ground serious social movements that actually were so powerful that the people in power just could not ignore them. And we want to push to a different, we want to broaden our perspective on politics so that we're actually not always having to lobby the people in power, so that we are the people in power. But we also need to understand that social movements and movements outside of just winning elections themselves are fundamental to any kind of specific change, that the radical change that we want in this country. We need to not fall into the trap of focusing on symbolism and focusing on rhetoric, and start really focusing on building coherent political messages and political communities around us on local issues and on the national scale. That's the only way that we're ever going to be able to implement any of the changes that we want, because we actually have to put those in place. While the Democrats can win an election on, for example, healthcare or climate change or COVID, and all they have to do is just point to those problems, and they will never deliver on those. What we want to do is very specific, actually change the parameters of day-to-day life for American people. And that's a much bigger task. And that's why we can't fall into this trap of focusing on symbolism and rhetoric, and instead really need to do the kind of work, the harder work of building the political organizations and the tools that we need to put those ideas into practice.
Hear, hear.
I want to share this Reed Sludge report of this news story because it's, oh shoot. Crap, my hold on. Something wrong with my screenshot thing, but I think if I full screen that, I can do it. Because it's amazing how, what's elaborated is basically meaningless, except to take the wind out of the sails of movements and say like, hey, we're on the same team, which is every resistance level can understand that when it comes to like, whatever those right-wing Republicans in office who say they're not really a Trump person. They're just there for like the dads who are getting a little bit concerned that maybe they are onto a neo-fascist agenda. But anyway, here's this story from Reed Sludge, and it's horrifying to me how the DNC has quietly dropped from its party platform language calling for an end to subsidies and tax breaks for fossil fuel companies, HuffPost reported. The language had been added to the platform in error. That's all they have to say, right? Like,
Yeah.
so all the elaboration that happens, all the campaign trail talk about how, I'm as progressive as anybody about my Green New Deal. Like, it's all bullshit because they can all just hand wave it away as a clerical error later on.
Well, it's also interesting too because how toothless like the actual party platform even is. It's not something, we're not talking about a kind of good Marxist party, right? Where it's like you deviate too much from the party line and you get censored and kicked out of the party, right?
Yeah, they're not disciplining candidates about
they're not disciplining anybody for anything that they're doing. So the fact even that they're pulling that out.
Arguably, they are disciplining people for going too far left.
No,
yes, right.
Yeah, that's the point.
Primarying from the left there. That's the one thing you can't do.
Yes, sorry.
And it's unbelievable too. I mean, just like on a political level, at a moment where the market for oil has just collapsed, and people who work in those industries, especially like the more on the more working class end of those industries, are in a really dangerous position right now. And the complete failure of the Biden administration and the Democratic Party to even come up with any kind of plan for them in a kind of green future is a huge political loss, right? Because those industries are in turmoil, and this is the perfect opportunity. If you were serious about when you say we believe science and we believe climate change is real, this is a perfect opportunity to actually try to remake those industries, and they're doing the complete opposite right now. So it's just one of those things. Like, we have to remember that we can even convince the American public, but until we start to build those organizations and political power on the ground level, they're just going to walk away from it at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The people in power.
Yeah, and I'm kind of kicking myself for saying too far left a minute ago, because it's this is a concept we've been talking about a lot recently. People have been saying for years. It's just the goalpost is ever shifting, and in the grand scheme of history, maybe we're a bunch of pretty lame moderates. I mean, like the scheme of things is so out of whack that if you talk about disciplining people for having strong ideology in a party, I kind of am kicking myself for making that joke because it insinuates that there's any type of sanity.
And no, we're talking about taxes, right? Taxes.
I mean, it's really infuriating, and that there'll be no accountability for all the people who spent the whole campaign talking about if you like your health care, you can keep it. As like, I mean, look, maybe if those plans are passed, there's like some option that's better for you now, but like that emphasizing that through this time period, and now to see a pandemic rip people from their workplaces and then rip their health insurance from years later, it's like I mean, these people are vampires.
We're endlessly gaslit.
Yeah.
So, speaking of happy times, I just wanted to take this moment to encourage everyone to join us here at the delightfully upbeat and chipper TMBS. The goal we have for this show and becoming a member, becoming a patron, it's much bigger than just what happens in November or, where our political parties are right now. I mean, Michael's vision and, Matt and David's vision is to be an anchor and a home base for a global labor movement and global solidarity. And just, the mission and the reason we come on every week and interview our guests and talk about things we do is just that we fundamentally have this really out there belief that people deserve housing, food, medicine, and dignity. And that's what we're going to continue to fight for.
Far left beliefs.
That's our radical Atifa. What is it even? I don't even remember the acronym. Anti-fascist. Atifa?
Antifa?
Antifa. Yeah, that's our radical Antifa beliefs. So anyone out there who wants healthcare, join us. Far leftists. But yeah, please become a member and subscribe, like whatever they say on the YouTube channel. And join us in that mission if that's something that you think all humans deserve, like we do. Help us.
Yeah, and I would just add, for people who aren't already patrons, you really do get double the content. You're getting the main shows, you're getting the post games, which is a whole other show that we record immediately after, where we play games. It's a little bit more laid back, have beers, we take questions from the audience. We do a weekly reading group. Actually bi-weekly now, so every other Monday, where we take some theory readings, philosophy readings that I curate. Always happy for suggestions, by the way, patrons, anything that you want to jump into. So you're really getting all this extra content on top of that, an entire backlog of years and years and years of interviews. We're going to start getting back onto our Sunday shows as well very soon, jumping back into releasing some more of our illicit histories that we have been working on. You really are getting almost 4-to-1 content versus this main public show, and you're continuing to help support this work, which we talk about all the time. We don't have to rely on algorithms. We don't have to rely on, investors or anybody like that. We just get to rely on the advice and the perspective of this incredible community that we're a part of. And thank you all so much for participating in that. And for people who are, thinking about joining, this is a great time to join. It's at patreon.com/TMBS.
Also, thanks to all the people who have been subbing on YouTube. We've passed 140,000, close to 150, which is a very nice number. We've come a long way in a very short time, and I appreciate all you YouTubers out there. So, yeah, are we ready for the Anna interview?
Absolutely.
Alicia, do you want to intro it, or are we already just
Anna came on and was, her gracious and intelligent self, and I had shared with Matt and David and Anna that Michael had sent me a text message about 8 days or so before he passed on, just very candid thoughts on cancel culture and where things were headed in terms of the culture war instead of the class war that was happening in America. And I just basically read it, and then Anna and I just kind of went back and forth and had a pretty honest conversation and reflection on that piece of writing from Michael. That's it. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to TMBS. We have the one and only Anna Kasparian with us, who we all know her from TYT, and then she is also the co-host. Did you change the title? I know it's Weekends. It was with Anna and Michael's, and now Anna and Nando?
It's just Weekends.
It's just Weekends. Okay.
Yeah.
So I, as a blood relative of one of the co-creators of the show, didn't even know the correct title of the show.
That's totally fine. Yeah. So we decided to continue on with the show, even though it's never going to be the same without Michael. But, kind of like how you're doing with TMBS, we want to keep his work alive and his message alive. So we decided to keep pushing forward with the show.
You guys are doing a wonderful job. I love tuning in, and I just feel like, I don't know, not to get too metaphysical, but if there is a space in which Michael in any way could be viewing or receiving it, I think he would be profoundly happy with what you guys are doing and really enjoying it. So thank you. I personally really appreciate what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
So I'm a little shaky today. I think I'm moving into a different stage of grief. So just putting that out there. This is all pretty raw stuff. When a few weeks before Michael passed away, he was really struggling, and this is something I kind of touched on in a bit of a moment of hysteria, a Majority Report. But Michael was very concerned, and I know there's a lot of differing opinions on this on the left, but Michael was very concerned about the culture war and how much of it was focused on individuals' actions and canceling and shutting out voices that oftentimes were maybe more focused on class or other issues within the system and a little less on identity politics. And I think Michael was getting really tired of having to kind of caveat everything as sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia. These things are horrible. Like they really have to go. But we also need to examine why this cancel mechanism is being used and who it's benefiting and who it's hurting. And sometimes under the surface, one thing we're saying we're championing, we're actually defeating with this obsession with cancellation. So I'm going to share you this text Michael had sent me. I'm looking at the date. I think it was on July 13th. So, it's very weird that was less than 10 days that he had to live. Obviously, we had no idea. So I'm going to read this to you, and then I would just love to kind of go back and forth and hear your thoughts. So this is what Michael texted me. Treating all beings with compassion is the most important thing. The root of it being, yes, we can be warriors for truth and justice, but not with hate and division. Nothing sentimental. The cancel culture is grotesque, evil, and terrifying. How can I condemn others for mistakes I've made? Or more provocatively, how can I nod my head along as someone is harmed in real ways for things I don't think matter at all or are small human mistakes? Now we will be in a period of deep restriction and paranoia, and not everyone will want to play the game. At the same time, that deep call for humanity, for deep and real recognition and action that says all dehumanizing of everyone, the human history of male sexual violence has got to go. It's all our task, a task of depth and work, not hysteria or not psychotic games or hysteria on public social media platforms. I write this with terror, shame, some guilt, and a lot of clarity. We need to evolve to a better place. Gossip and destruction and projection won't do it, and neither will a lazy, violent, and cliche backlash. The task is love and awareness, and I'm here for it. So I told Michael not to ever post that. And I was like, you'll stick your neck out and people will go digging for something that doesn't exist because you're owning not having a purity test, pass.
Yeah. Yeah. As you read that, it's hard to it's still hard to process that he's not here, because what people don't know about my relationship with Michael is how he was really a rock for me behind the scenes when it came to how cancel culture gets weaponized by dishonest actors to try to destroy people. Yeah. And so, one of the last exchanges that I had with him had to do with, luckily it didn't turn into a big thing, but it started with this accusation that I work at TYT as a host because of basically my privilege, right? Mm-hmm. And there were accusations that TYT only hires full-time white hosts, which is laughable because we literally don't have a single full-time host. Everyone who works at TYT literally does 8 different jobs because we're an independent media company. And that's just how it goes. You're not well-funded or well-resourced the way, let's say, CNN is. Right. And, for me, the hardest part of dealing with that was the erasing of my own identity, right? And the fact that I've gone through absolute hell, being an Armenian woman with progressive values, by the way, working for a Turkish man. That's a huge, huge no-no. And all of that, all of the pain and suffering I've been through was completely erased. And all that mattered was Anna is white looking, is white, and so as a result does not deserve her job. And so all of a sudden I see people who I'd considered my friends coming at me, right? And it was one of the most painful things to see that kind of betrayal by people who I love and admire and, am loyal to, because once I let someone into my life that way, I give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't just turn my back on them. Anyway, the reason why I bring that whole thing up is because it was a terrifying experience. I didn't know if it was going to turn into a big deal. And the only person I felt comfortable talking to about the situation was Michael, because I knew that Michael actually understood how things get weaponized, not just to destroy people politically, but also to destroy people professionally to create opportunities for themselves. And so, he was a person who really saw it clearly and understood it, did not ever make excuses for racism or sexism or sexual violence. He understood that those are societal issues that we need to address. But he also understood how those issues were utilized as a weapon. They were weaponized and they were used as a tool by dishonest actors who have absolutely no interest in really doing what it takes to change how this system disenfranchises people systemically. But they do see an opportunity to use these situations for their own personal benefits. That's why we've been talking about racism, sexism, sexual violence in this country forever. But there hasn't been any progress. In fact, it feels like things have devolved and unraveled. And it's because we're stuck on getting involved in these like ridiculous judgment games or word policing, when in reality, we need to take a look at the people who have positions of power, who actually have no interest in changing things systemically, but just want to use rhetoric to attack others and judge others. That's what I'm seeing time and time again. And yeah, it's hard to speak out against it because it's very easy to twist the argument that I'm making or the argument that Michael was trying to make as nothing more than people who want to dismiss or excuse inequalities in this country. And that couldn't be farther from the truth.
Absolutely.
It's just that we see how, you know, how dishonest things have become.
Yeah, I think it sort of plagued Michael. I think the idea that anyone could misconstrue his intentions, because Michael, like, suffered when he saw other people suffering. I'm not trying to make it seem like Michael was like this saint-like person. Like, he's a fully complicated human, but he genuinely, the fact that people, maybe because of our own trauma growing up, I don't know, but when he saw people suffering, he just couldn't stand it. And what leads to suffering in this country? All the things we just spoke about, you know, the systemic racism and sexism and, you know, all of that. But then it was maddening to him to see an incredibly wealthy, privileged white woman, you know, speak out, you know, all white men of this privilege. And he was like, well, what do you mean? Like, does like a poor white man in Flint, Michigan have like more privilege than like a white female movie star living in Los Angeles? Like, how, like the playing field got just so strange. And then, you know, it's completely dizzying. You know, you have 1 minute, you know, Kamala Harris saying she stands with all women, she believes women, and we're vilifying Biden. And then the next minute they're campaigning together. She's his VP pick. And the same people I see on social media that aren't even in politics, that are just, you know, bystanders and citizens, go from posting like, yeah, you go girl, like tell him, to like, yes, like best ticket ever, obsessed with them. And then in my personal life, I've had people like I went to a woman whose wedding I attended, a woman who I worked for years. They've unfollowed me for just being at all critical or not stepping in line with like their class values or gender values. And there's no space. It feels like there is another McCarthy era coming around language, and if you step out of line a little bit, being completely vilified. And
I mean, we're in that era right now. I think that we're in the middle of it.
It's happened.
It is happening because, okay, so let me also note that one of the biggest issues is that the discourse in this country makes it appear as though any particular group of people are a monolith, and they all agree and they all want the exact same thing. They all want the same language to be used. They all want the same, you know, behavior to be demonstrated. But, you know, people are different, even within any given racial group or gender group or whatever. There are differences among those people. And no one part or no one faction in any given group is representative of the entire group. So, you know, my husband is a mentor, and his mentee recently told him just last week that he doesn't like to be referred to as Black. Okay. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he made that clear with my husband, and my husband, of course, respects that. And, you know, is more careful with how he communicates about race when he's with his mentee. On the other hand, though, just this week on Twitter, I saw someone post about how people using the phrase people of color is offensive because it erases Blackness. I mean, now, people of color is used when you're talking about various groups of minorities, not just Black people. But for that particular person, people of color is apparently offensive and triggering. And she would like to be referred to as Black. And so, but like, so here's the thing. The point that I'm trying to make here is not just that a group is not monolithic, but also that we're quite honestly wasting our time discussing the appropriate words to use when referring to people, when behind the scenes, nothing has changed systemically. Nothing.
Right. It's all the bread and circus.
Yeah. Every day there's another police brutality story. There's another Black person who's shot in the back in front of their own children. But okay, fine. Let's go ahead and engage in debates about the appropriate words to use, because that'll get us somewhere, right?
Right.
It's just frustrating. It really is.
So Anna, a couple of weekends ago on Weekend, you had covered the Alex Morse story. Alex is a friend of a friend. I grew up in the town over from where he's mayor. And then we've seen this evolution happen. There's kind of been this shift. Like at first, everyone comes for Alex, and it seems like, he's going to be, I was cracking up when on Weekend you were saying, the allegations where he texted some students or messaged them on dating apps. And then I forget who put out we're standing with the survivors and their stories. We're like, who survived what? Anyhow, it seems as if it's backfired. Like I don't know if you looked at the New York Times article, it came out a couple of days ago, but there has been a shift in terms of he's fundraised a tremendous amount. Something like 800 volunteers have come out of the woodwork, and all of a sudden there's been this shift where people are saying like, this is bullshit. And, how dare these, kind of fraudulent allegations be made up. And like you said on Weekends, this journalist also repeated, there is a homophobic taste to it, or not even taste, just reality to it. Like if you're not going to be a sexist Buttigieg, married to his husband, like very heteronormative relationship, then you're going to be scrutinized for any like past dalliances. What do you make of this shift and the money he's raised and the volunteers that have come in droves to support him?
Well, luckily Morse's story was uncovered, and it was abundantly clear, thanks to great reporting and investigation, that accusations of sexual assault were purposely weaponized in order to destroy his political career. And I see establishment Democrats do this all the time, the time. I mean, my good friend, colleague, Cenk Uygur, he dealt with it when he was running for Congress. And I can't tell you how demoralizing it is to know someone so well personally and know that the smears against him are just completely manufactured by the Nancy Pelosi's of the world. And yeah, I'm calling her out by name. She knows, what kind of games the Democratic Party played in that particular race, and I'm fully aware of it. But, to experience that firsthand and feel like you have no control, because on one hand, you have the bad actors who do the weaponizing. On the other hand, though, you have people on the left who are much more concerned and obsessed with appearing to be the moral ones, right? They want to have the moral high ground. So they immediately turn their backs on people that they've known, people who they've supported, people who they agree with politically, because they don't want to be the ones who get called out for still supporting someone who has unproven allegations against them. Now, again, luckily, thanks to good reporting, we know that what happened to Alex Morse was nothing more than a ridiculous homophobic hit job by establishment Democrats. But at the same time, I think that it should be a teachable moment for people on the left, okay, for the sunrise movements of the world, to wake up and understand that the people who are weaponizing the rhetoric are not our friends. In fact, they're not our friends, period. They hate us, they want to destroy us, and they will do it by any means necessary. So to immediately turn your back on someone, especially someone you support, without at least pausing for a minute, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they just go ahead and they're like, oh, we unendorsed, we took a vote, we unendorsed. Like, please grow up and understand the political climate that we're currently functioning under and understand that we're being manipulated, period. But I don't know. I know that what I'm saying is super controversial. I'm sure a lot of people are going to cancel me. But look, there is no...
I'll uncancel you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Leisha. Because there's no constitutional protection from getting offended, okay?
Right.
Life is full of difficult moments where you're going to be confronted with things that might make you uncomfortable. But this new culture of, oh, it makes me uncomfortable, I don't like it, I'm offended, I'm going to cancel, well, you're going to end up completely alone. Because people are complicated, issues are nuanced. And I think that there's, for all the talk that we hear about a revolution, I just think it's laughable when all it takes is a little bit of manipulation toward the left and boom, forget about the revolution. No, we're going to go ahead and cancel this person, that person. All of a sudden, climate change isn't that important because I want to signal to the world that I'm much more moral than anyone else. So I'm going to go ahead and condemn someone publicly. It's embarrassing.
So speaking of morality and, just this moment we're in right now, and this is veering off topic a little bit, so forgive me, but this election coming up where we have either maybe the end of democracy. I'm not even sure if Biden wins, if there will be a peaceful transfer of power. Like, we're in a really scary moment. We obviously, it sucks. We're between a potential dictator or a conservative neoliberal who we know doesn't really have our back in a lot of ways, if at all. But that's hands down the choice we have to make. You know, follow me on this one for a second. How are you having the conversation around, yes, I believe we have to vote, and I believe we have to vote for Biden, but how are you holding this future administration accountable without, again, being lumped into, it's like whenever you're in a third rail, and that's how I'm, connecting it to our conversation before, you always get pushed into being in the conservative camp or fighting against change. If you really, truly are trying to make change, you become de facto the enemy. How are you just communicating about this time, and what's your kind of, headline for right now in terms of this election coming up?
Yeah, I think that the majority of people who either identify as Democrats or even leftists are going to end up voting for Biden, right? Yeah. I refuse to do like this full-throated endorsement of Biden. I think Biden is an awful candidate. I think the Democratic Party is putting the future of the country in jeopardy with, the stunts that they pulled during the primary. Yeah. I don't think that Biden has it in the bag and that, Trump is easily going to be voted out of office. I think that we're being super naive in thinking that, honestly.
Right. Absolutely.
But with that said, I find the debate about, are you going to vote for Biden? Or, I find all of that petty and boring and incredibly lame. And I think that, on one hand, you have like the Rahm Emanuels of the world, like pressuring you as a Bernie supporter to vote for Biden. But then at the same time, he writes like a Wall Street Journal op-ed and appears on CNBC where he essentially says that Biden needs to move further to the right and flat out reject the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, which, by the way, Biden has already done that. But Rahm Emanuel really wants to like almost codify it because in Emanuel's world, it makes much more sense to bring in the Never Trump Republicans, not just temporarily for this election, but for the Democratic Party indefinitely moving forward. So basically, we have Republican and Republican light, right? You have Trump-era Republicans, and then you have Republican light, which means even traditional Democrats who are moderates really don't have a place in the Democratic Party at this point. And the Overton window just keeps shifting further and further to the right, when in reality, you look at polling and you see the majority of Americans, a recent poll found that 69% of Americans want Medicare for all. They want single-payer health care. But it doesn't matter because our politicians are going to keep moving to the right, including members of the Democratic Party. So no, I'm not doing like a full-throated endorsement of Biden. I'm not judging people based on who they plan to vote for. I think that for me personally, I'm going to end up voting for Biden. But I refuse to just like fall in line and urge everyone to do one thing or the other. I think people need to vote for their conscience, with their conscience, and do what's right for them.
Right. Well, thank you for giving us that answer. I feel like they're also connected, where we've created this society where anything that's outside of the two boxes, and even if you find the two boxes to be way to the right of any sort of reality that you feel comfortable in or you feel like you can survive in, that's the paradigm. And if you say anything outside of that, you are immediately, excommunicated and considered the problem. And that's something I feel the pressure of socially in Los Angeles. And I just see that. I feel like constantly people are just having conversations that are just like the tiny frozen layer of like the top of a lake. My New England is showing. And then there's like miles of water underneath, and we can't even access that because even bringing, that up is illegal, or like, forgive me, my grief brain is killing all the SAT words, but you follow it.
But I totally get what you're saying. I mean, you become, you get ostracized for it. People start to antagonize you if you notice something that isn't necessarily very helpful to improving and progressing society, but it goes against the grain. So people are going to be upset. There'll be backlash on Twitter. But I've kind of gotten to a point, Leisha, where for me personally, like I've given up a lot in terms of money, personal career advancements to do what I'm doing now. Yeah. Because I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe that it's important to work at a place where I can speak clearly, openly, without worry of censorship. And so if I've made that decision, it's really on me to use it, right? To use this unique opportunity that I have. And if I'm going to be afraid of what people have to say about me on Twitter, I mean, honestly, who gives a shit? Who really gives a shit? Because in reality, there are a lot of people out there who agree with what we're saying right now, but they're afraid to speak out. Right. And we got to change that, because if we have like one dominant narrative and we immediately attack people who question that narrative, we're not really living in a democracy. We're not really supporting a diversity of ideas. And I'm not talking about ideas in the dumb sense that Dave Rubin does, but I'm talking about people who have genuine critique of how we're going about things. And we need to support that and listen to that and consider it, even if it makes us uncomfortable.
Well, Anna, I think you're just such a badass, such a strong woman. I've been a fan of yours for years. You're just a tremendous friend to my brother. I'm so grateful that he had your friendship and love in his life. And I look forward to just having you as a friend and someone by my side and as, a citizen moving forward. You really inspire me with your clarity and your strength.
Yeah, it's been so incredible to get to know you. And I'm so proud of you guys for continuing the show and, just continuing the fight, because it's not easy to do. And I can't even imagine the grief that you're feeling, because for me, it's been kind of debilitating at times. And so I just have so much respect and love for you. And I love that you guys are still doing this show. It's so important. So please keep it up. And if you guys ever need anything, please let me know.
All right. Thank you, Anna. Much love.
Good job, Leisha.
Yeah, that was a great interview.
Thank you, guys. It was a long time coming. I really pivoted from on July 13th telling Michael to never post or speak about this publicly to reading his text message on the internet. So things have shifted.
I was hoping that we could take a couple minutes actually to talk about it a little bit more generally, specifically cancel culture. And if I could just sort of set the table a little bit, because talking about cancel culture is probably one of the more frustrating conversations that you can ever have, because it's one of those things where the definition is so it's all over the place for different people. And there's been this kind of counter narrative from folks where they say that cancel culture is just when wealthy journalists, primarily like New York Times journalists, are mad that they're in trouble and they say, "Oh, I'm getting canceled. Think somebody like Barry Weiss." And that's 100%, true in a sense. That's exactly what they claim. And that's exactly what people like Dave Rubin claim. And all these right wingers claim as a defense against like legitimate criticism against them. But what's frustrating to me is to not be able to see that that exists. And that is sort of like, the way that some people are using this term, and to not see what's going on within left-wing politics and within left-wing organizations and communities and, Twitter space or whatever. Right? Because those are two very different things, right? Criticizing a millionaire journalist because they have a horrible take on Palestine is very different from what we're trying to talk about, which is policing of language, a predetermination. The way I would define the cancel culture and the way that I think about it, it's a conversation where the results and the intent of the speaker is predetermined. Mm-hmm. And I think that is sort of fundamental to the problem there, is that we're not allowing for a kind of nuance or jumping into a conversation or a situation with an open mind, but instead saying like, okay, these are our general terms and understandings and how we're going to treat people in this kind of conversation. And then we're just going to go off of that. And that, I think, is the culture, at least, that Michael was criticizing and that I'm critical of too. But I think is very distinct from this kind of straw man argument I think that some people try to do to get away from having a real serious conversation about the problem of the left. But I'd be curious to hear what y'all even think about that, even the framing of it.
Well, I think that, yes, that framing is accurate, but I also think just on a very practical level, and, this is probably overlaps with what you just said, but Michael was just really concerned about just like what this did to like the everyday citizen, but then also frustrated by having to continue to justify that evils are evils in the world. Mm-hmm. And you can get into the semantics of it, but it's you're really fucked. Sorry, are we gonna get another language warning on YouTube? Because you're like really boxed in here because you can't. It's kind of the ultimate example right now of like the individual versus the system, and what the system kind of crushes people into these corners because you can't. You really can't speak freely about this without seeming like you're trying to defend horrible behavior.
I mean, we had Noam Chomsky on the Majority Report with Nomiki Konst was hosting on the day, and she asked him about the letter, and Michael was supportive of the letter, and supportive of the letter in the way we all know why Noam Chomsky signed the letter, right?
As we know why Barry Weiss signed the letter too.
Exactly, right? So Noam was on and he said, the outcry signifies a problem. And I'd say, it signifies actually two problems. One is that there are just complete cynical opportunists like Barry Weiss who marginalize the left as a project, who are using this conversation for that. That's like the whole Glenn Greenwald, why he was out for that. And then there is a censorious impulse on the, I don't know if you want to call it the left or the liberal left or, however we want to define this. But, I remember Michael going to the Jordan Peterson symposium. I don't know.
Or whatever, the anti-Jordan Peterson.
Anti-Jordan Peterson.
I was like, excuse you?
Sorry. Well, it was like, how do we confront Jordan Peterson? And he met Burgess or Doug Lane, or maybe both of them there.
Both of them at the same time, and Richard Wolff.
Wow. And so, and that's why he went, right? Ideally, when we have Ben Burgess on and his book is titled "Give Them an Argument," we don't concern troll Ben and be like, "Hey, what are you criticizing the left too much here?" It's because we recognize that actually, our job here is to be force these people to elaborate what they're not wanting to elaborate. And when you actually just try to shut them down, then they never have to elaborate what they don't want to have to elaborate with regards to their ideologies. And Michael was upset. He met those great people, Doug Lane, Ben Burgess, all these people. And then he also met a whole bunch of people that were frankly not mature enough to handle this. I think Michael to a certain degree agreed that what Jordan represented was a sort of crypto reactionary impulse, right? You have to meet that, especially if you are professional in these sorts of fields. You can't just try to marginalize this sort of stuff. You actually have to meet it. That's your job. And I think he saw a lot of people abdicating their responsibility with that and leaning into the censorious stuff. And I think that's why he had, the positions on the deplatforming stuff, right? Because, my bottom line on this stuff has always been, and we've had this discussion, I think, on this program, that I think it's better to start with a specific instance like the Morse thing and build that into a critique of how this culture is weaponized, then starting with the general. Because I think that almost always, particularly if you're doing it on a mainstream media platform, you're almost always going to be in the company of these people like Barry Weiss and like Thomas Chatterton. Just a riff on Thomas Chatterton quickly. It's funny his name is Thomas Chatterton because when I talk about the elaboration being unhelpful for these people, like Thomas Chatterton comes on the page and says he kicked Glenn Greenwald kicked somebody out of his chateau in France because they were criticizing Barry Weiss. He also let slip that they didn't want, some people didn't want Glenn Greenwald on the letter, right? Which is why the point of we don't want to shut these people down. We want to keep them talking, but on the subjects that we want them to be discussing and the criticisms that we have. We actually put the microphone to them and say, respond to this. I mean, you see Yasha Monk, right? Like people have been hounding Yasha Monk pretty regularly on this Bolivia stuff. And now you see him have to do PR. I mean, to a certain extent, that's like, and Michael was, I'll just say one final note. Michael was to a certain extent, the book was his final, I guess, kind of say on these matters. He wanted to move away from even dunking on the individual people, although, I mean, we still did it. We still did. Dave, exactly, right? And it's because there's an issue, right? It's definitely not. We got the show to a point where we can actually build something productive, and not just try to like interrupt sort of reactionary messaging. And I think Michael was ready to build that thing productive. Nonetheless, there is a huge part of this audience who came to us because of how Michael would talk through, and not just, you know, in a historical way, but talk through what Sam Harris is getting wrong about Muslims, or, you know, what Dave Rubin is saying about economics. And that stuff is an important part of this job too. And I think like balancing both of those things is like, I think we are in a position with this show, and that a lot of shows on the left aren't, where we can actually build and be more productive. I mean, look at the results Michael got with Lula, for instance. Absolutely. But I think we also have to do some of this sort of defining basically liars, or especially the media ones, especially people who have a following as such, because I think that's what an important part of why his book will be useful, is because of how it gives you the tool set to do that.
Can I ask you, like, do either of you have cancel anxiety? Because I know a lot of people have like very strong cancel anxiety.
No, I mean, yeah, Brett Weinstein called for my firing the other week. And I mean, luckily, like the revenue streams of this are diverse enough, and like we're paid by the patrons and members on my shows. So, I mean, not really. I don't know. Okay. I'm not super concerned about it. I mean,
what about you, David? Do you have cancel anxiety?
Well, if I could just say real quick.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, too. I'm going to answer that, but I also just want to note that.
Why aren't you answering this?
Was to say that, you know, one refrain lately has been to say that, like, oh, because Bill Clinton spoke at the DNC, that means cancel culture doesn't exist, right? Which is so untrue, because the point is that cancel culture, the one that we're trying to talk about, is much more of like a left phenomenon. We're not talking about what the rules are for people like Epstein or Bill Clinton, because obviously they have the material power to survive this, right? They don't have to deal with this kind of public of sphere. But specifically, I think that's really important to recognize too, because I just get really frustrated with the way that a lot of people try to argue about this phenomenon. I mean, I think that, like, you know, cancel culture, like, to answer your question, Leisha, like, do I have personal anxiety about it? I don't find myself to have ideas that I'm not prepared to defend or whatever, or have a past that I find to be particularly bleak. But what I do think about a lot of the times, I do not think is healthy, that I think is a very big part of kind of cancel culture, just like this kind of system that we're creating, is actually like tweets, for example. Like, so if there's a big event, and a lot of what people will do now is they'll go through all of your tweets to see, did you tweet about this thing? And if you didn't tweet about this thing, you know, 4 years ago, that means that you actually shouldn't be able to speak, you know, today. Like, you know, you actually are inconsistent. Have you see this all the time? People cancel folks, right? They actually go through their history and say, like, oh, well, you didn't tweet about this. Oh, you tweeted about, you know, Notre Dame burning, right? But you didn't tweet about, you know,
about the rainforest.
Yeah. And I think that is like a really kind of, it's an extreme example, and a kind of like ridiculous anxiety for me to have. It's not one that like keeps me up at night, but I think it's an example of what, at least, you know, we were trying to talk to about, like with Michael, about, you know, the problems with the cancel culture, or whatever we want to call this larger phenomenon of like actually like constantly policing people's, like, you know, space and how they're articulating their ideas. I think that is more even than like the form or the function of cancel culture, like that kind of system or jurisdiction that people seem to have, and like that they think that that's a good dunk on somebody to see if they tweeted about something 3 years ago. I think that that's a really unhealthy culture to develop, right? But I think
I agree.
Actually,
why?
Why? Because you don't like holding people to account?
You don't like years history of... I mean, one of the things Michael was very fixated on was, I mean, his own evolution politically, his own evolution, you know, spiritually and you know, emotionally. Like, we're not born fully like we are at different maturity stages in our lives. We learn things. Like the fact that there has just been this like insane standard that like, okay, so say I started my first Twitter account at age 16 and now 2 years later, now time has passed and like I'm supposed to have had the same political ideology, the same moral stance as, when what X event occurred this many years ago. That's insane. I mean, that is completely maddening. And what I think it does is like, yes, there's this level of this where you're talking about these like very wealthy, very powerful people that kind of basically can't be canceled because they have the means not to be, whatever. Bill Clinton, allegedly, a lot of people are, now saying he's probably a pedophile. It's speculation. I don't know if there's actually hard evidence for that. But yeah, he gets to speak for 10 minutes at the DNC. But
he's been in the company of some.
He's definitely friends with pedophiles. I don't know if he,
travel companions.
Yes, he's best buddies with pedophiles. Odds are.
Well, I mean, look, I just want to say one quick thing about that, which is like, even if you want to extend the most amount of charity to Bill Clinton, did we lose? Oh, wait, sorry. We saw some F's, but I don't think it was related to that. Most amount of charity to Bill Clinton on that issue. Let's say he never, all he did was get the massage that he's photographed getting from, a woman who said she was abused under Epstein, not by Clinton, she says.
Mm-hmm. Nice guy.
But guess what? You know what? I mean, I've said this on the show before, but all Epstein needs is he collects powerful people because that is a signal to this entire network of people he's victimizing to do not go to the authorities because guess what? I bring them to my island and party with them.
Oh, sorry. So to circle back to like Michael's fixation with this was essentially like if you want to like put it, base it back in, class in America or whatever you want to anchor this into. I think he just thought that like, yeah, there was a chance that like someone could write on Medium, like, oh, I'll just use my own name because I don't even want to put out into the air. Like, Alicia Brooks sexually assaulted me in, 2009 or whatever. And that's forever written in ink. And that really can be used to discredit you. And like when you guys are doing the type of work you're doing and the type of work that Michael did, like there are people that don't want your voice out there. And this is a genuine tactic that can be used to discredit and essentially, like I write on television. There are people in LA who are TV writers who are not like super famous or rich people that allegations have come forth and some of them are really dubious and like I can't speak for all allegations, but I know a couple of stories that it's like there's not much there. There was a situation with some extortion, a situation with, and then these people never work again. That was the core of, I think, what was just stressing him and what he was speaking out against, less so about like the upper echelons of it and even the right's take on it.
Well, I think for sure. And I mean, I would just say, definitely like sexual allegations, it becomes like what that tactic is and how we deal with that is, I think, almost so murky that it's like almost a specific conversation, right? Because it's definitely involved in that, but that's just a whole different conversation how we want to deal with that, because obviously there is this massive history of just people constantly being ignored. But I think the larger question about like cancel culture specifically for the left that I think is the most, it exposes the kind of flaws in the ideology more so than focusing on the the allegation stuff, is like people having, for example, like bad takes a few years ago. We're using the wrong language or the wrong words or the wrong way to think about it. Not only because I think that we all agree that we believe in personal growth and change and all these kind of things, but what I think a point that is oftentimes missed in this conversation. Well, how are these things brought to light? They're brought to light through social media. And it's actually is just like a reproduction of a capitalist form, right? Which is like social media, which is Twitter, which are designed to keep you on them constantly. And to think that these are the important real life conversations that you're having, that this is the most important social space for you to be in. It's actually like a reification through the left's own like rhetoric, right? Of actually like, this actually is the important space. Like what you tweeted 5 years ago is actually, your real life and is what matters, right? It's actually a kind of perverse recreation of like what the Silicon Valley like executives expect and want from the public, right? Which is this kind of idea that like the social media world, like that is the fundamental real space of existence. And it puts a pressure on you to say like, I need to put my real authentic self constantly onto social media to continue making more posts, which is for them how they make money,
right?
right? You know, it's like a weird thing where we're actually feeding into a kind of like very capitalist neoliberal rhetoric of saying we need to create social avatars online, public, to be consumed by people that are very different from the kind of political activities that we want and think we can be using these avenues for, right? It's really kind of perverse logic that really fits into a kind of a Silicon Valley virtual, capitalism. I think that we all are hoping to reject and push back against.
Yeah, and I don't want to be misconstrued about, God, the horrific abuse and trauma. And, as someone, I'm not going to get into this but as someone who has been assaulted and has had things that, it's horrible, and to be belittled and dismissed and not heard, that is disgusting. And it's like there's no language for that. But then to additionally then create an environment where people can come forward, but then there's this whole other, circus around whether or not that can even be trusted, because even the mechanism of believing people has been co-opted. That's the real mind fuck.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I would just bring up the Al Franken thing to kind of put some meat on these bones. And I have complex thoughts, I think, on Al Franken. I think, frankly, they're who was the woman? Was it Leanne Tweeden? I think, was that her name? Who accused him? She was a associate of Sean Hannity's. Mm-hmm. Now, subsequently, more things came out, including a Facebook post by this woman who didn't publicize it at the time, of her standing with Al, calling him a creeper, which made me think this might be a pattern of behavior with Al, that even if it's not as bad as we think, it's going to be a liability to politically. So that's why I thought Al Franken should step aside. No, and also Al Franken, I don't think was as great of a senator as people say he was. I think he was.
Okay, hot takes.
I think a little bit overrated.
Did you tweet about it at the time?
Yeah,
otherwise we can't believe it.
I'm pretty sure.
Otherwise, it doesn't exist.
Where are the receipts, Matt?
But nonetheless, if the only accusation was from the woman with the photograph that had this connection to Sean Hannity, I thought it was fair at the time to raise that association and say, guys, this is a political campaign. This is a political operative. I think we can at least put a question there. Mm-hmm. Now, like I said, I think subsequent things came out that proved, I think, that, right? That he is, and I don't want to get over actually moralizing about it, but from a political standpoint, it was a liability for the Democrats and he had to go. But I think there was a bunch of people who were you can't even talk about her politics. And like I said, it's right. well, can we talk about why she decided to air this now? And I think when it comes to matters of material importance and and the importance of power, you have to ask these questions, right? That's why, it was gross. There was a huge part of the left who was saying, everybody standing up for Alex Morse is really telling on themselves with this. And it's a really bad look. And all those people were vindicated. But if reporting didn't come out, they might not have been. And that would have been a huge split in the left, causing massive amount of distrust, which, it already has. Mm-hmm. But at least now the distrust can focus itself on how the party actually engages in this culture and weaponizes it.
I think so. My just quick line on it is just what this kind of rhetoric or regime, the way of thinking about these subjects does is it makes very difficult conversations almost trivial in the way that you're treating them. And it gives a huge opportunity to our opponents to use that against us. Right. And I don't think it's the kind of culture that we should be cultivating. I think that we should be cultivating a more radical culture, a more righteous culture. Absolutely. But one that is not so prepared to come into every situation with a predetermined answer. And I think that's fundamentally the problem, is that we have a predetermined rhetoric and way that we believe that things are going to go. And I think that's always is going to be lacking when you actually are implementing that in real life.
I think we kind of had this opportunity here where it seemed like there actually might be this opening here where people were going to be held accountable, and people had been victims of very serious and very heinous and very, just grotesque crimes and injustices, maybe were going to be held accountable. And now the whole thing has just been co-opted. And I think there's been a backlash against it. I mean, these crimes and these abuses seem now to be skyrocketing. And now this entire movement is just kind of becoming a laughingstock on multiple angles. It's honestly just very disheartening and scary. That's my final line on it.
The one thing I do want to say though is like I think this is something the left needs to get better at, and I think I like that we've made it part of our project. But as far as like the things in culture the trends I'm really concerned about, one, lawsuits. A lot of these people who
did you see that I'm suing you?
Yeah, exactly. No. A lot of these people that talk about cancel culture and endlessly, am I still frozen?
No.
And endlessly troll the left about how censorious it is. Like want any opportunity to sue us and sue us out of oblivion. So I think that's frankly, I would much rather take a social media lambasting than a legal letter.
No, of course.
Any day of the week. So I want to also the big point with media I always want to bring up is, oh wait, that looks like it's going up. So this is the trend for journalism jobs going down. You can see this is a trend for PR jobs going up. That's what's been happening for the last like 25 years. And that capitalism is really like canceling our ability to have conversations. And you look at the amount of people the amount of journalists who were employed 25 years ago versus today, and it is horrifying, folks. And that's the only other point I want to make.
I think that's good. I think there's a lot more, unless you had anything else, Leisha, that should make this.
No, I think there's enough sound bites now to cancel me, so my work here's done.
Coming strong.
I don't know.
To move into our next jump, I believe that is not too far off, honestly, from kind of hot topic. Cancel culture and the gig economy, I feel like, are something that people have a lot of hot takes on, are constantly going into. And this is the title of our show, so definitely y'all jump in. I'm just going to set the stage basically for this and give a little bit of analysis for this week's gem. But this week I really wanted to talk about the Uber and Lyft situation in California. And for people who are new to the gem segment or new to the show, go back into our archives. I've done a lot of analysis on Uber and Lyft's business model. I actually want to make a kind of more macro political point here than particularly an economic point. So definitely check out all those old gems on Uber and Lyft. But, last year, I believe in September, California passed a bill that cracked down on the misclassification of workers, which is fundamental to the business model, the failing business model, but the business model nonetheless of Lyft and Uber. And both of these companies have been trying to fight it in the courts. And on August 20th, one day before the deadline where Lyft and Uber were going to have to start properly classifying their drivers as employees, giving them benefits, health insurance, sick leave, all those kind of things that we think is, the baseline in a decent and moral society. The day before that deadline, when that was going to go into effect, Lyft announced that it would be suspending operations in California, and then Uber said that they were considering the same thing. That very same day, California's appeals court granted an emergency stay for the companies to continue using their old business model and continuing to misclassify their workers. So basically, these two massive ride-sharing companies got another stay on their ability to be able to misclassify these workers and hyper-exploit them in a really unfair way. So I just want to make this one economic point first. Obviously, Uber and Lyft have to misclassify their employees so that they can pay them less, so they don't have to pay them the basic benefits. But one thing that's oftentimes missed about Uber and Lyft's business model and how exploitative it is the fact that these drivers own their own cars. So typically, if you run a business, you use your materials throughout time, and then you have to pay to repair them on any losses that come to them. What Uber and Lyft have done, basically by misclassifying their workers and using those workers' cars, they've been able to sidestep a massive business expense, which would be the maintenance of all the vehicles that they have in their fleet. So that's just one other example of the way that these companies just hyper exploit their workers. Now, Natalie Scher made a great point, I believe in Jacobin, about what Uber and Lyft are doing is a capital strike. And for what people who might not be familiar with that term, what that term means is that when you have corporations like Uber and Lyft who have significant material power in society, their ability to basically step outside of society, to step outside of the economy, to kind of punish the government, to punish the public at large. Because obviously if Lyft and Uber were to just disappear tomorrow, there would be a massive effect, not just for all the workers and the people who are driving for Lyft and Uber, which would be a massive hit to their income, but also to people who are reliant on them to get around, especially in California. Not that it's too different from the rest of the country, where our public transit systems are just in complete disarray, right? So that's what a capital strike is people who have money, organizations that have money, who have the ability to basically step outside of the economy to be able to flex their economic muscle to get what they want. And that's what they did. They flexed their economic muscle, and then the courts almost immediately responded, right? So that's a power problem. That's a political problem, and that's something that we have to address. But I also really wanted to hit on a really great article that was in The Guardian by Aaron Benanov, whose name I hope I'm not mispronouncing too terribly. But he makes a very crucial point on about Uber and Lyft. Yes, so there's a lot of talk about automation and technology as the primary drivers of inequality in today's digital capitalism and gig economy. But as he points out in the Guardian piece, which I highly suggest y'all check out, and also in a much longer piece that he wrote in the New Left Review, it is actually the lack of profit that has led to these really bizarre business models. Like, let's not forget that Lyft and Uber are two companies that are massive, that have very much affected all of our lives, but have yet to make a profit. How are they able to do that? Because we have actually redesigned capitalism into a system that so privileges finance, that is so designed towards the whims of finance, that you can actually run a massive corporation like Lyft and Uber that has significant effects all across this country and not turn profit, right? Because you are able to use finance to constantly buoy yourself and your C-suite, the higher ups in your corporation, while you are just hyper exploiting people at the bottom. And there is no plan to profitability. The only plan and hope there is that one day these companies will be able to use driverless cars. And that has not come into fruition for them. So they are in the situation where the only way that they can survive is to find more and more ways to exploit basic labor laws, to push wages down as low as possible, right? So it's a two-pronged problem, right? Is that one, the problem that we're fixated on, which is that they're exploiting people and we need to fix that. And then the second problem is that actually capitalism's model, its productive model, is so broken that the only way for people to make money right now is to cannibalize already existing industries. In that case, buses and taxi companies. So these people aren't coming in and actually finding a new productive model that is more efficient, that's getting more profit for them. They're finding a way to cannibalize already existing activity.
And it's not even just private activity. They bought out the entire Carnegie Mellon robotics, I forget, department. Yeah. It was like, it's going to be a partnership. And then a year later, it's like, actually, we're just buying all of this because they wanted to get this AI stuff. And lo and behold, they actually couldn't deliver on it. So we just destroyed this research department in a failed attempt to finally make our bet pay off.
I mean, exactly. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting. And it's one of these things that we have to start watching and we have to include in our analysis, right? That's why we push back so hard against the Yang analysis, right? That it's like the robots are the problems that are driving inequality. What we're saying right now, it's actually much more dire, but we need to be clear-eyed about this if we want to address it, is that the actual profit system of capitalism is in crisis at the very top. And the only way that they're able to squeeze out profits for a small few people is to cannibalize already existing economic activities and to increase the rate of exploitation that workers are facing. Those are the two fights that we need to be focused on and preparing solutions for. Because this idea that we could have a robot tax and that's going to solve the problem, you're absolutely wrong, right? Because the problem is not that there's robots. The problem is that the system is fixated on getting as much profit as possible, and the opportunities to profit on a kind of equitable system, or what we would call like the golden age of capitalism, the 50s, which obviously was a nightmare for the vast majority of people. But the idea that you could work 40 hours or whatever, have a house and a car, that system is fundamentally broken for the workers. But that system of profit is also broken for the people at the top. And until we start to prepare political solutions for that, we're going to continue to be in the cycle of just this cannibalistic system, which is just moving the problem around from place to place. So yeah, fuck Uber and Lyft. Absolutely, what's happening there is a capital strike. So we need to push back against these big corporations. But what Uber and Lyft represent is an actual fundamental crisis in capitalism that we need to start preparing ourselves to find a solution to.
Nailed it.
There's not much else to say.
Yeah.
We're in a codependent relationship with the destruction of the world as we know it.
I mean, it's just crazy though. Like when you really start to look at it, how amazing is it that these two corporations that you would, if you were writing a history map of like this period of time, you would include those two corporations.
Oh, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
Would you include Airbnb as well up there on that tier?
Of course. All of those corporations and their inability to turn a profit is really fascinating and world historic. And we forget about it because obviously the people at the top are making money for themselves. But these corporations are unable actually to even meet their own expenses. It's a really bizarre moment we're living through.
At least when Wells Fargo coaches were helped colonize the West, they're actually turning a profit on it.
Yeah.
I think is what David is saying.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it better, but it's just
for
bizarre,
the big bank model. It's also like, going back to your number 2 or number 1 anxiety, I can't remember where it was on your list, Matt, but also the fact that like if you're in a car accident, those companies aren't held reliable. Like the juggernaut of like the being able to foist the legal responsibility onto the contracted worker in their own vehicle.
Yeah. Or even the fact that you buy a car for $20,000 and you put $100,000 on it, and now that car is just completely depreciated.
Yeah.
And that goes on the driver instead of the corporation that, profited immensely off of all those models.
It's like evil genius.
Yeah.
Honestly, anytime I've ever gotten to the nuts and bolts of this stuff with a Uber or Lyft driver, the only time they've been optimistic about like the business proposition is if they're relatively new to it, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, you get stuck in it. Anyways, we got to keep moving. Do we think we want to do
keep
this?
moving, but don't take Uber.
I think we should dip to the post game.
I think we can actually dip to the post game and do this Pelosi story there.
All right, yeah, some fun Pelosi stuff.
If that
guys.
Doesn't get you tantalized.
We have some praise of the voters. What else fun stuff do we have?
I didn't click on this Bolivia thing, but this is about Evo Morales trying to get canceled.
We can definitely talk about that, and also they're also trying to sell off all the state assets before the election. I mean,
don't give away all of our post game secrets.
Well, we got to tease them. We're
going to talk about an interesting part of the USPS that I did not know was an organization.
Honey.
Well,
the Postal Service who arrested Steve Bannon, their acronym is USPIS.
So USPS. So any 12-year-olds out there watching,
Postal Inspection
arrested Steve Bannon for defrauding the Build a Wall campaign.
I mean, mail fraud is like what they always get guys on, right? That'd be the United States. Is that the United States Postal Inspection Service?
Yeah,
I imagine. Yeah. Okay.
And
so we should aspire to mail fraud. Is that the top?
Now we have to put all cops are bad and then an asterisk and then accept the Postal Service. USPIS guys. I don't know. Anyway, let's.
All right.
We're gonna jump to the post game. Thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.